We're putting up barriers.
We can't all just be one big happy family. We have to
Why we gotta build the wall?
All for good.
I'm gonna win you over on this one, Robert. I'm gonna win you over on this one. Through civil conversation.
Are you video recording?
No, we don't do
Video recording?
That'd be too easy for me.
Live stream. Live stream.
Oh, live stream. Oh, very cool.
Very, 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 very high level explanation. Very similar. We expect Levi to phone in.
Oh, we expect anyone to phone in. No. Today's going to be a pretty quick demonstration on testing in Rust. This is actually a super easy chapter, which is nice because the last one was pretty cool. Even though I don't think the last one was as bad as the first one.
I think 4 was harder.
First one was 4.
4 was the ownership chapter. The premium Discord.
Oh!
It looks like it really good out.
Try it out. What up?
It's like Evan's on.
We got a DS.
3DS. Yeah.
Did they make a regular DS?
That was made a 2DS. Same thing as this, except it doesn't have a 3D side now.
Well, you got.
But it's not. But it is not the sequel to the
I had a
DS.
DS and a
Because
3DS.
the sequel to the DS is 3DS.
Didn't they make DS Lite?
DS Lite they didn't make that, but that was different because it has a GPA cartridge.
Yes, you had all the electronics.
Okay,
For a while.
it's a great story.
That part you scared is the math story.
Like, if you're using the screen, you put it on the highest screen because your head is covered in the lower third.
Okay, I can see that. It's because there's so much cranial mass. It's got nowhere
Or
to
you
go.
can
but
move the
up.
cranium.
You think that, but it's mostly the.
Or you can move the cranium off to the side. If you really want to be up.
I think I'll do that. I'll move it.
That'd be nice. Keep going. Another inch. That's good. Perfect.
Another inch. You can't handle another inch. Yeah, dude.
Well, I mean, I can't. We just received it.
You can store it.
All right. So we'll start off, Russ, like we normally do. The OpenStreetMaps. Check this out. We are now up to 124 parks in the Houston area that have been automated.
Automated.
That I've entered, and these are all now tracked on OpenStreetMaps. And the idea here is that we have OpenPass. It's called Turbo. No, that's not it. What's it called? OpenPass Turbo. I think. There we go.
Overpass.
Overpass Turbo. That's right. So check this out. Run here, you're going to see a list of all of the parks that I've done so far, and then you can take any of these and zoom in. This is only 20% of Houston's parks, and see where the actual park is going to be. So it's actually the only map of all of the Houston parks.
Magical.
So that's what I'm working on.
So like Google doesn't have that?
Nope. You can search for a single map in Google, but you can't say, let me find all maps managed by the Houston Parks and Recreation Department.
Okay.
There's nothing like that. And then the goal here is, which you'll probably appreciate, Robert, because we both have problems with politicians. The goal here is I want to show all of the different maps, parks, and the amount of acreage that there are, so I can write a program to map out what they consider free speech zones. So the city will only allow you to talk in a 10-foot by 10-foot area of each one of these designated parks, despite the fact that we all pay for and fund and maintain all these parks.
Wait, what is that?
They only allow what?
I'm not even joking. It's the most insane thing ever.
Okay,
And
say
then
again.
Democrats will only allow you to talk in a 10-foot by 10-foot area, known as, this is not a Democratic idea, this is a Republican idea, but the Democrats, because they're the same thing anyway, they just adopted it. So this has been in Houston now for about 10 years, where they will actually charge you with criminal trespass if you try to spread an idea outside of the 10-foot by 10-foot free speech zone.
That's an infringement of some
So where's the zone? Where were you standing?
No, they actually write it. Like, watch, here's an idea.
I don't
Let's,
understand.
okay, well, that's fine. Let me show you something here. Let's take it, let's zoom in to a park. Let's take one right here, right? Okay, so now this is a bumfuck nowhere park called Carter Park, right? Let me open up another window. We're gonna go to Google, and I'm gonna say right down here, Carter Park, Houston, free speech zone. And what you're going to see here is park sites, First Amendment expressions in our park. Oh no, this I find tremendously funny. They've done this for the park called First Amendment Expression. Now that to me is epic irony. There's a park called First Amendment Expression that celebrates the First Amendment, and they have designated the red square as the free speech zone. And the rest of the park, you don't have any First Amendment rights anymore.
Oh, what?
That's insane.
So look here,
I saw that.
this is the list. And then we can go down here to Carter Park and I can click it. And, well, that just takes me to the map. But if I look over here where it says map, you can see it. So now we have this stupid park that I just showed you, right? Right here, that's Carter Park. And now you can see in Carter Park, that little red dot, that's your free speech zone. So that is the only area in which you're entitled to free speech
And
rights.
where's this?
And you're only entitled to free speech rights between sunrise and sunset.
That's anti-constitutional.
And you still have to get a permit.
What? No.
I'm serious, yeah.
That's ridiculous. That sounds unconstitutional.
Well, I'll tell you something, Robert. You may not want to acknowledge this because of your current political leanings, which I intend to challenge, but in the United States, you only have rights if you have property rights. And the reality here is that property is owned by the city of Houston, not you, and they can govern it as they see fit. Just like if you're on a private, building like this one,
Yeah.
you also have no free speech rights. You can get arrested if they tell you to leave and you say no. You can't exercise your rights on property you don't own. So the one thing that's really changed is they've determined now that the city can own property without it being viewed as something you own in common with the city. this is very problematic for me.
It's such a meager amount of land. How are you supposed to know you're standing in the thing? It's like so small.
Well, they define it by saying right down here, so it's latitude 29 and then
No shit.
39 arc
Oh my
minutes, 39
God.
arc seconds, and
That is the most
0.0.
like, that is the most like passive, not even passive aggressive, that's just kind of like, so we did it, but we really didn't do it.
Yeah, but it puts the city into a really awkward predicament where they have to give these zones in every park, or the current default is that the park still has free speech rights. So in order to erode your free speech rights in everything that the Houston Parks and Recreation owns, right, they have to essentially claim that there's a free speech zone in each one of them.
When did this start?
Under Parker in Houston, but I mean, it started a long time ago. This is the George Bush policy.
Wow. I didn't know they were trying to erode free speech that far back, like in this situation.
Oh yes, I can tell you the history of all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, the thing is that right now that's what you've got is a 10 foot by 10 foot area, and so they had to do these for every different asset that the Houston Parks and Recreation operates, right? In order to make the claim that this is constitutional, right? So they have to either say you have the right to speak anywhere on this park we own, or this is the free speech zone. You can only speak there.
Oh,
So-
this needs to be challenged.
It's a cruel and unusual requirement, not punishment, but a
Always the
requirement.
people that have never been arrested that want to see it challenged. So the interesting thing about this one is that this meant that the Houston Parks and Recreation had to claim a bunch of things that aren't parks or parks because they operate on them. And that, in my opinion, has led to hilarious things that would be very easy to challenge. Like, this is City Hall Annex Plaza. This is something Google has no knowledge of because it only exists as a legal technicality. Let me show you this. This is literally the stepping stones that they have like in front of the City Hall Annex building downtown.
Oh,
They have 6 planters, but because it's technically managed by the Houston Parks and Recreation, they go and they fertilize it. They had to demark this little red dot, which is the only thing that's not a planter, as being a free speech zone. So I think it'd be really hilarious to argue that it's on the top of the land bridge rather than underneath it, and then to just, go and make that your free speech area on an important day for the city.
I'd do that.
Hey, you also need a permit apparently to have your free speech.
Yeah,
Well,
see, these areas are open to
That's
users for the
hilarious.
exercise of First Amendment rights during peak hours. Users must register with HLUG Permits Office in order to reserve the area in advance. Although not a requirement for the area's use, it is recommended that all users register to avoid conflicts.
Or
All
basically
right,
for
so you
them
don't
to stop
have to,
you.
it's not a requirement, then, okay.
Yeah, it's not a requirement.
But
It's
if
not
10
even
people are
something that
there-
says, I've already registered it. We're gonna have a cop convention right here, pro-police, and you don't have a registered permit, so leave now.
What if your group can't fit in a 10 foot by 10 foot square?
Get a smaller group?
What gets me is that it's during park hours. What is the park hours of the City Hall Annex? That's the real question.
All Houston parks are from dusk till dawn.
That's still on, okay. I just thought it'd be funny if they had to set manuals like this
When
one.
did you start with this fascination of Houston parks?
Oh, yeah.
He lives in Houston.
I live in Houston. All I do is troll the city. That's it. But I mean, I've also gotten into a lot of trouble with this kind of stuff. So, I'll probably bring this up at like the next hackathon. I'll make a nice little, graphic display where I'll show all the different parks, and then I'll show all the different little red dots where you can have freedom of speech, and then I'll show like a relative amount of space that you can occupy and exercise your rights versus the total amount of land mass that the city of Houston owns, which is literally like 20,000 acres, right? So all of the free speech zones would fit into like a quarter of an acre, and they have like 20,000 acres. It's an insane amount of,
What have you gotten in trouble for that you alluded to?
just all kinds of stuff. If you Google my name, you find it, but I'm not going to go into all of that.
All right.
How much prison time do you get if you step outside the zone and speak your mind?
You get charged with what they call, this is a new thing, this is only probably 10 years old now, but they've been working on this. And this was something that I think Obama did a lot to make worse. It's called criminal trespassing, which was previously something you can only get on private property, but I can get it on government property too. Originally, you had to be within, I think, 200 feet of a federally elected official to get criminal trespassing on public property, but that's no longer the case. Now you can get it anytime they tell you.
Did you know I'm a federally elected official? I am the official of Deer, what is it called, county in Houston.
Nice.
I know, right? Very honored.
Very honored.
But honestly, I'll be honest, people don't know about this because technically it's confidential data, but I'll tell you what we do. I've seen them here. There's none. I think it's a scam.
Here in Houston?
And here in Houston, I have not counted one singular deer.
Oh, I didn't know that there's here in Houston.
We should have thrown on the here.
Well, yeah, but that's a great.
All right.
I didn't specify.
Anyway.
Great.
So I'm 20% done, and I've got 124 points. Yeah.
Is there any technology you can put in free speech zones that will help promote any speech that happens in those zones and make it more widespread?
My boombox.
Megaphones.
You can't have any amplified sound sources, even in a free speech zone, without an amplification permit.
That's
What about a motion detector camera in a hotspot that, like, when it senses motion, it starts alerting Twitter and setting up Facebook feeds?
You can't put any camera like that on a government property.
No.
Of course not, right?
Could I put a poster with me as king on those particular spots? Just leave it there.
You could carry a poster and say,
You
I am
can't,
the
wait,
king.
you can't have a camera in a free speech zone?
You can't mount a camera, you can't affix a camera to anything the government owns.
Well, we just have to make it dangling from the sky then.
If you have a drone permit, you can do that, yes.
In England,
But it can only fly in a 10-foot square spot.
You have to have a drone
We'll
permit.
circle around. Until it runs out of battery and crashes into the ground.
You guys are horrible at challenging laws, but anyway.
We're not as skilled at getting thrown in jail as.
Yeah.
Usually just break laws we don't know about.
All right. Let's get back down to this. So, we have automated testing today is what we're going to cover. So here's the deal. Rust is much more well integrated than many other languages. And what I mean by that is Rust and Cargo are two in the same. And with Cargo you can install packages. With Cargo you can test the code you write. With Cargo you can generate documentation. It's a one-stop shop. So this is a pain in the ass in many languages because people get overwhelmed with options. And in Rust, you really get all of the basic functionality you need to do this in a way that is better than most languages can do it, right? So what we're going to cover today is what that looks like in Rust and what some of those advantages are and why we should be excited about some of the design decisions Rust has made. So the first thing about Rust that we should recap on is that Rust is a compiled language. So when you run any one of the tools that causes Rust to compile, you are essentially fixed with a binary at the end. And there's a lot of different controls you have as far as how Rust optimizes that binary. We use the -- production flag for that, or you can set your release target to be production. And then you have more optimizations. There's also development. These things are really nice for making it, for controlling those types of very commonly used options. But there's other things we can do too, like conditional compilation. And conditional compilation is really useful, and I use it in most of the things that I do in Rust now, because it allows me to say, I may want to compile this functionality, and if I don't, I still want to have this core functionality work. And what's nice about this is, for instance, well, let's go down here to something we had today. Marco has a bunch of design decisions he likes. He wants me to include them in my code. I don't want to maintain them, and I don't want to ever see them. Right? So the real problem there in an abstract
They're too powerful.
He can't talk because he's got pizza in his mouth, but even if he didn't, it wouldn't make sense because he's trying to talk. So there's the problem here is that I don't want to deal with that code, right? So what you really want is either you maintain your own fork or hide that code behind a feature flag. Feature flags are very popular in Rust because they like to say, I want this feature. So that feature could be, Marco style or something, and then it changes all the behaviors of your code in counterintuitive ways that he likes. You could also do like a feature flag for Windows, so then it'll add new Windows code on there, or a feature flag for network capabilities, or a feature flag for colors. You know, all of these types of things, I can have those features enabled and then generate a different binary depending on what those features are you want. And if you don't want them, you have a smaller binary, the code doesn't exist, right? Out of that functionality of conditional compilation, we have this testing framework that has been created. And the testing framework basically all works on that. There's a special mode for cargo. You can enact it with --test. --test tells your cargo and Rust-C, when they're compiling, include code that is marked as test. If you don't compile with cargo test, that code is not included. So you don't pay a price for having tests inside of your project or inside of your files. You can include as many tests as you want, and they will charge, there will be no cost in any way, shape, or form, speed, executable size, and anything, when you compile without the test flag. Okay? So we're going to start to see that, and the reason why I wanted to give you that introduction is because this would be a horrible idea in any other language, and we don't see it because very few languages have conditional compilation and have built frameworks around this. So here's an example, CFG test. This says if the configuration option for test is set, compile this module. And if it's not set, then this essentially will evaluate to false, and none of this code will ever get compiled. So CFG test is one of the methods in which you can have conditional compilation in Rust. The book doesn't go right into that, but I think it's very important to see it so you can understand why this is unique. When you run cargo test, the test flag gets set. So this is what's actually setting the test configuration flag. And that's pretty much all it does. It marks up these different functions. It works. So you'll see them in the output right here. Tests, it works. Showing you the module name, and it's showing you the function name. That's right here. I'll make it a little bigger for you. So we have module test, function it works, and then right down here, module test, function it works. And what this is going to do is it's going to compile and run this code, right? And when it runs this code, it's going to essentially run through each of these assert macros. There's two different types. There's assert and assert EQ. And it's going to say, you know, if the assertion is true, pass the test, then it's going to essentially look for true inside. And if there's anything but true on assert, you get failure. So if you have false, if you have anything that's not true, you're going to get failure. Assert EQ, on the other hand, is going to make sure that the result, the left-hand side equals the right-hand side. So, as a last note, you can put a comma here at the end and give more detail about the assertions, more text information. So here we see another one, configure test. We're saying here that this function below is a test inside. So we only compile it if we have the configuration parameter test, which is provided down here with cargo test. And we're only ever running this function down here, right, when that code is compiled. So we mark the function as a test. That's going to produce the output right here, test exploration. And then we can see here that the assertion was okay. Assert EQ, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay. Down here we have another assertion. We're doing the same thing we did up there. Over here we have another test, and this one panics. Right? So this is another thing. If you panic inside of a test, you automatically fail. Unless you have another macro at the top that says should panic. So sometimes you want to know that your code panics. How do you test to make sure your code panics? Right? Well, there's a function that'll do that. Now, if you want to make sure your code doesn't panic, it's very simple. Right? Do nothing. Because it's always going to run that code, and if it panics, you're always going to fail. So there's always an implicit test. If this panics, fail. Right? Anytime you see test and the word panic. Or anytime you see the word test and you call something that can panic. Checking results with the assert macro. Here's another thing we can do on it. The assert macro is, so we've seen assert EQ in all these examples above. Assert EQ tests the left-hand side of the comma with the right-hand side of the comma. Make sure they're both equal. If it's not, it can print out a more verbose message. It can say left-hand side doesn't equal right-hand side. Left-hand side equals this, right-hand side equals that. So it's more explicit. But there's a more generic method called assert, and this one just tests that if we have a Boolean, right? So if you're not testing for equality, you want to test for greater than, less than, all those types of things, you can use just the assert macro. And then what you're going to do is you would just say, less than, or foo is less than bar. If that's true, assert is going to pass. Here we have a test, and we say we create two different rectangles, larger and smaller, and we're asserting that the function can hold, which is a method on larger, given a reference to smaller, returns true. So this assertion is going to make sure that this stuff inside of the assertion is true, right? And that's what we want. So this is very nice because we can see here the larger one is obviously bigger than the smaller one in both width and height, so it should be able to hold the smaller one, and that's how that would read. Here's another way you can do it. You want to make sure that the smaller triangle can't hold the larger triangle. This is the inverse of that. So how do you do that? Well, you know that this is going to return false, right? Smaller cannot hold the larger. So this that I'm highlighting in blue is going to return false. But we want it to pass if it returns false. So we prefix it with the exclamation point that negates it, right? Anytime you have a Boolean after an exclamation point, you get the opposite Boolean. Not false is true, not true is false. That's what it's showing you here. This is going to return false, and not false is going to be true. The assertion will pass. Okay, so now we have a reintroduction of assert EQ, which is what we did at the top, and assert NE. Now, to be honest with you, I've never used assert NE, but okay, we're glad it exists. So we can already tell you what that's going to do. Assert NE is going to say, if the left and the right are not equal, then the test passes. The assert NE macro will pass if the two values given are not equal and fail if they're equal. It's just the opposite. When it comes to these tests, they're pretty simple, right? It's a pretty simple boilerplate thing to add this to the bottom of every file. This is going to be how you do your unit tests. These aren't integration tests. These are just unit tests are done this way. Integration tests we throw into another directory called test. Really quick, there's different types of testing we do when we develop software. We generally break down all testing into three different types. We have a testing called a unit test. And a unit test is really small. It tests a unit of code. And a unit of code is, generally speaking, a single function. So you should have a unit test for every function you create. A function takes in an argument, and it gives you back a result. A unit test would say, given this argument, I'm expecting to get back this result. And sometimes that seems like a waste of time, because it's very simple. Like a unit test for a function called sum may be sum 2 and 2, and then make sure the result is 4. You're testing, given the input 2 and 2, the output is 4. But it's still something that we like to do, because if anyone ever makes a mistake in sum, you're catching it with a unit test. It doesn't rely on any other code. An integration test, on the other hand, they can be a lot more complex, because an integration test can cover the code you're writing and how it interacts with another server, right? So if you have a server-client model, an integration test can actually programmatically cover what you're expecting the server to give you back. Now, an integration test, by the very nature of it, they are more prone to being flappy, failing, when you don't expect it. Like, for instance, let's say that the server is down. All of your code could be correct, and you could just be interacting with the server that's having a problem, right? So in this types of case, your integration tests are going to fail. So this is a different type of testing that is often more valuable, but it's more complex, right? So you have a test that is testing your system more holistically, but it's relying on things that are external. So a failure may not be your problem, it may be someone else's problem. But it's also going to be testing more of that feature set. You can test the whole interaction. We call those integration tests. And then the third type of test you have is what we call an end-to-end test. And an end-to-end test generally tests your application as you expect the end user to integrate with it. And these are the most important tests. In my opinion, it's somewhat okay to only ever do end-to-end testing. In fact, I would say, as a general rule of thumb, it is more okay to only do end-to-end testing than it is to not do any end-to-end testing. But, you know, different people have different testing, you know, desires, and you'll see Rust has different methods of modeling these. So here we have a function greeting. What's up?
Can I inject more, just a couple more opinions on testing? What you just talked about?
Sure, if they're better than your opinions on Ansible.
End-to-end testing, also called functional testing, is the biggest one. It fails the most. Unit testing fails the least. It runs the fastest because it's only testing little tiny things. As Evan said, it's not testing much. It's just testing what the function does, what it says it does, which is good to know when you're considering the integrity of the code that you're writing. Those little tiny unit tests are also good when you're first writing the code, greenfield coding. When you're coming onto a legacy code application that already exists, the integration and functional and end-to-end tests are way more important because exactly like Evan says, they are telling you that whether it works to the user or not. But so when you're designing code, unit tests are super important. And the reason why they're important when you're designing code also is because they will highlight if what you're writing is too complicated and difficult to maintain. If it's too complicated and difficult to maintain, it'll be very difficult to write those unit tests. But if it's modular and easy to maintain, then it'll be easy to write those unit tests. That's it.
I would also say, look,
You can also use like some integration tests and end-to-end tests by just mocking you don't need a server. You just create a mock HTTP request service instead of regular HTTP request, and then mock the HTTP response.
this is also a philosophical question, right? To some degree, like a lot of this is philosophical. Some people will write tests before they write code. They say that they always want to make sure the testing is done first. For me,
Test-driven
these
development.
people, they call it test-driven development. I don't get along with these people well at all, and they don't get any work done. So I don't really care much about that. But I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of people that have this opinion. I would go so far as to say maybe 15 to 25% of programmers at least find test-driven development attractive or an ideal. And yeah, I hate it. I want no part of it. I don't do any testing before I am making my 1.0 release, right? When I make my 1.0 release, I usually go back and test things, and then I drop the test there. Because I'm not going to test code that's going to be changed and I'm not going to be supporting. That's just a waste of my time. If I'm not telling you I'm going to support code, don't expect it to work, and I'm not going to test it. And I would say likewise too, on mocking, it's also a philosophical disagreement. Like, I don't ever mock, ever. Principally, I don't mock. Because if I'm writing an integration test, it's because I want to see how it's integrating with another external server. If I mock it, I'm just making the assumption that what I'm doing is correct, you know? So,
What do you mean by blocking?
For example, I'll give you.
Like,
For example, I write a program to do medium change of brokerage, and it takes a long ass amount of time to run when I make the change of logic, to have to request the API request to the server again every time. So once I get the payload from the server, I already know what the payload is. So instead of just every time I run the integration test to make expensive requests to the brokerage to get the data to verify it, I simply just have the original payload. I have the original mock my HTTP requester to intercept the mock payload I already have on hand.
so are you still, when you start your integration test, are you making one request to get the payload and then it's just reading that same object for all the tests, or?
No, it's different for each. It depends on the URL.
Okay.
Because I already know the payload, what it's gonna be from the server. It's not ever gonna change really. So I just mock.
I mean, my response to that would be like, the question that I would get at is, how do you know that the server that you're communicating with won't fail in production?
Oh, it won't fail. I also do integration tests for timeouts and stuff like that. But you just check make sure the logic is actually working, or the trading logic is working. I don't use it. I can just mock the payload or.
Yeah, it's available, but what you're describing is integration testing to a T, and it's wonderful to be able to separate functions, separate parts of the whole project, so that you can test this section, and then you can test, because every time, if you're just testing this section, it's super fast. You just mock out everything else around it, and then you test over this section. Maybe one test that tests the server itself. Instead of making a million calls to the server and waiting forever, you just have one test to make sure it's able to connect and gives you the output that you want, and then you mock all the other tests, and they run super fast.
It's highly debatable, but I'm just telling you, like, philosophically, in the way that I would develop, I would just wait forever. I mean, I have all of my tests run as part of a CI pipeline. I don't sit there and wait for them to happen.
How do you think integration tests, like for my example, you get some software information from the server, and you have to calculate the prices and trades for it. How would you do that integration test without mocking?
I would just get the information from the server on every test run, and it would take longer, and I would stress test the server, and then I would say this is a real.
No. The server is external programs like TD Ameritrade. If you stress test them, they will say you violated their terms of service.
So then my question would be, but I mean, then, like, the follow-up question that I would ask you on that is, why doesn't your application itself have internal caching, so the application can't do that, can't trigger that condition on a Ameritrade?
Because the quotes, I am. I have the payload, but the quotes change every 15 seconds, every second.
So then should,
Every millisecond.
but then my question is, outside of your mocking, right, the integration that you have to TD Ameritrade, it should internally cache for 15 seconds, right? Outside of your mocking entirely.
Yeah, but about the integration testing, when I'm testing it.
If you want to test a million different scenarios, you don't need to go to the server every time. Like if your normal application is only going to make like 5 server calls, and you have an integration test that tests a million server calls, there's no reason to stress test it that much.
I don't agree, but I'm just saying, like, this is just this philosophical thing, right? Like, what I would get at is, if you're telling me that in production, I don't want my server to hit TD Ameritrade more than once every 15 seconds, then rather than relying on the mocking component to do that caching, so we can make that very fast, I would actually build that into the application itself. The application of the SQLite?
In real world,
So when your application hits it the first time, it loads it first in the SQLite database.
and every 15 seconds it refreshes the database.
So then why isn't that sufficient to run your whole testing suite?
No, because every time I get the new data, I need to test the logic for when the new data comes in the prices change.
You need to run different tests on different types of data.
Yeah. I don't know that I entirely follow it, but I mean, my question would just simply be, why, I mean, if you want to know that the prices change, you hit it once, you already have SQLite doing internal caching, why do you need the mock to also do caching?
No, what if I change my logic? I want to see if the logic, I change the logic to the logic, my training logic. I want to test the training logic with the price codes again. But I don't want every minute when I change the logic. Let's say I change the logic like every minute. I'm testing the value, right? I don't want to hit the brokerage API server every single minute to just test my logic to see if it works or not. And I want the logic to be, I want the test to be reproducible to see how the change is affected. So you just mock the payload and TD Ameritrade.
I mean, I get it. Fundamentally, the question is, when it comes down to reproducibility, right? You're saying either I want that behavior to be reproducible, which is totally fine. What my response to that would be is, I don't want that behavior to be reproducible because I want it to be as realistic as possible. And if the server itself doesn't provide reproducible behavior, I don't want to pretend like, I don't want my app to be conditioned for that. You know, I want it to deal with what's out in the real world at that point in time.
Yeah. Sometimes I get, sometimes because it trades every 15 seconds. Sometimes the server doesn't respond for 30 seconds, and then it misses the trade. That's a separate integration test. The test that pretends that the server timed out.
Yeah. And you may have a use case where mocking is like highly necessary. I'm just saying, in my own examples that I've run into and how I built APIs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but you have control of your server. I think in your cases.
No, I've gotten blacklisted multiple times. Marco can vouch for that. You know, JetDB and all these other companies that we run with, you know, when we run tests, we actually use their server live, and there's certainly downsides of that methodology. The upside is we see the same thing the clients see. And it creates problems for us usually before it creates problems for them. You know, I'm just saying like it's give and take, you know. You can pick whichever one you want. But I'm just saying, I don't ever mock my stuff. I always prefer to test on the actual resource. If people like mocking, by all means, mock away.
Yeah, I would say when I first started, I would just repeat the servers. But once you've done it enough times, you sort of already have a good idea what the data is. You can just start mocking. It's not that you definitely don't do it the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here we create this configuration thing for test, and again we're doing this conditional include. We have this test called greeting contains name. We say greeting Carroll. It's going to come up here. We're providing Carroll to the greeting function. So the name is going to get sent to Carroll. It's going to return a string. The string is going to be the result of hello, and then the argument we got, which is Carroll, the name. And we are asserting here that if we set the result to greeting Carroll, that the result must contain Carroll. And this works because strings in Rust have a .contains method, which can take any substring. So .contains takes a substring and it looks for that in the parent string. A string slice and it looks for that in the parent string. Here's another one down here, pub function greeting. String takes a string and we just return hello. So this one ignores it, and what they're showing you is if we replace this greeting, which uses the argument, with this greeting that does not use the argument, we fail. And here's what the failure looks like. It says, thread main panicked with assertion failed, result.contains Carroll, and that gives you the line number. So this assertion will generate this error right here. And it's telling you exactly what happened. The result did not contain Carroll. Down here, we're doing the same thing. The only difference is we give it a third argument result. And now because we're giving it a third argument result, you can actually see it right here. It says, panic, greeting did not contain a name, value was hello. So you can see that we're getting more information because we're testing this and then we're providing result to this format string. Greetings did not contain a name, value was, and then result, right? And then that's what you're seeing right here. Okay, so the second argument to assert can be a format string, just like format, right? It takes the same syntax as this. This has got format macro as a format string as the first argument. Name is the second argument. This is how format works. It's very popular in Rust. This is the same way the assert macro works. The only difference is the first one panics if it's not true, and then it does the format. So these are the two arguments that are more or less just given the format. Checking for panics with should panic. Okay, so far we covered that a test that panics fails. Sometimes you want a test to make sure things panic. In order to check that, we can use should panic. So here we declare a test, and this test, if it doesn't panic, it fails. So guess new 200 gets run. That's going to come up here. It's going to call the struct guess. That's what this is. It's going to call the function new, and it's going to say here the value is greater than 200, so this side will be true. And it's going to panic. Guess values must be between 1 and 100. So here we're testing that if we guess something more than 100, we panic, which is exactly what this code here does. And they're just showing you what it looks like. So if we remove that, so we were saying here, we're panicking because the value is greater than 100, right? If we replace this code with this one right here where the that check isn't there, it only panics if the value is less than 1, then now we're getting an error. Test did not panic as expected. So if you write should panic and you don't panic, this is what it looks like. So test greater than 100, no, test did not panic as expected. So we can also specify not just that it should panic, but that what the panic message should have. Less than or equal to 100. You can see that here, less than or equal to 100. So this should panic, which I believe is actually a relatively new thing, that they take this argument. This looks for a substring, and it says this string must be in this panic message up here. These are not things you typically test, but it's nice to know, I guess you can. And you will very rarely see things in Rust that panic to begin with. So typically you see panics when you integrate with C libraries and that type of thing, not in Rust. Unless you're running in something like embedded Rust, and you see it all the time. Using result TE in tests. So we have if 2 + 2 = 4, and then we have else error, and then we generate the error. So what they're showing you here is that this function, it works, is not returning an empty tuple like all of the others. Right? If we go up here, you're going to see that this function greater than 100, it returns nothing. Returning nothing is the same thing as returning the unit tuple, right? Doing nothing. This one down here, this new addition is, we're returning this, a result, right? So, because we're returning a result, it changes the way the test works. Previously, the test didn't care what the return value was. Now the test cares. Now this test here cares. It says, with the result that I get, which is either going to be okay or error, if I have an error, I want to fail. So if you're going to return a result in your test, which you can do, you don't have to just rely on it not returning anything and asserting. If you're going to do results instead of assertions, then it'll work just fine. Just return the error, and if you get an error sign with that result, that test will fail. So this test fails if this gets returned. It succeeds if this gets returned. And of course, that's very logical. You can't use should panic on tests that return a result, right? Because a result must always return a result, and if you panic earlier, you're not returning anything. Okay. Controlling how tests are run. So you can very easily run tests in parallel in Rust. Unit tests are very simple to run in parallel. We just use this --test-threads flag, and it tells us how many tests we want to run in parallel. So we talked about this earlier. These tests are generally speaking fast, and you can have thousands of them. So you can say, I want to run, 4 of these things at a time. And if you have a 4-core machine, that's really nice because it will go much quicker. Showing function output. This is important, in my opinion. And I know that this is important because I've hit this problem on multiple occasions. I hate this behavior. I will tell you, this I think is a design mistake. In Rust, print line inside of a test doesn't do anything because the test runner ignores anything you print to standard out. It's only concerned with whether or not the test succeeds or fails, and it is the only thing that can print to standard out. Why this sucks is because if you have a failed test, you're always going to want to see the output. So a much better behavior than the Rust default, in my opinion, would be if you fail the test, always show what was printed in that test. Rust does not do that, okay? What you do, if you want to do that, is you do the -- show output, right? -- show output means I want to show the printed stuff to the screen too. And then you'll start to see this type of stuff. I got the value 4.
All the time or only?
All the time. Yeah.
Would you like to see it just went on failure?
I got the value. Hold on 1 second. Is it doing it on failure? This test will fail, standard out. I got the value 8. Print line, I got the value 8. Maybe it already does this. Hold on. Remember the test with cargo? Oh, no, this is already the behavior. Okay, never mind. So if a test fails, it currently does print the standard output, the failure message. I think that this changed. I don't think this was the way it was originally, which was driving me nuts. So I'm glad to see that this has actually changed. So now it does work that way. I take that back. If you fail the test, you see that what's printed to standard out, which is what they're showing you right down here. I got the value 8. So it's showing you that it shows on a failed one, but the one that passed, you see nothing. I'm totally cool with that. Just keep in mind that if you ever want to see things that pass, that are in front of the failed test, you can see that with this special flag -- show output. And this is definitely a gotcha thing. You know. Running a subset of tests by name. So here's the deal here. When you provide a name argument, like you say down here, cargo test 100, this will look for either a function named 100 or a function whose name contains 100, right? So you can see here that the name is 100, but it would also look for, like, I think, left anchored stuff. So here we do cargo test add, and you can see it runs add 3 and 2 and add 2 and 2. So it's actually looking for functions whose name matches this pattern, add. And yeah, it's contain add, not just the ones on the left-hand side too. So this is going to run any test with the word add in it. That's really useful, and I'll use this very frequently when I'm running unit tests. Ignoring some tests unless it's specifically requested. Here's another compilation thing called ignore. And this sets it to where that test is not compiled, right? So it's simply ignored. Or it's either not compiled or it's compiled and not run, I should say that. You can see here how that works, cargo test, and it says test expensive test ignored. So it is compiled, it just doesn't get run. And if you want to run things that are ignored, you can use the -- ignored flag. That's going to trigger running these tests that are flagged with ignored. So sometimes you want to create a test and it doesn't work because a resource is failing or whatever, or you've broken that code, and this shows you how you can turn that test off and then turn it back on. And you can also do include ignored too, which will run all the tests whether or not they're ignored, not just the ignored ones.
It's like you can also provide a reason why it's ignored within that flag.
That's kind of cool. Where do you see that?
Honestly, GitHub Copilot just
There we go. Test organization. So far we've only seen how to do unit tests. We do this. We include this test pragma, mod test, and then we conditionally have it set to compile with configure test. This is not the only way to do things. Here's another philosophical debate, whether or not we should test private functions. If you ask me, the answer is no. But some people that like testing a lot more do test their private functions. Here's integration tests. We spoke about these extensively. Integration tests, we essentially create a directory called tests, and then we just throw all the different test scripts inside of it. The test scripts for an integration test do not have to have the configure test thing. So because it's in a test directory, Cargo treats it differently. You don't have to wrap all of the code with CFG test. So here's an example of an integration test. And you'll see down here we're using adder. This is exactly how your users would do. They have to use that the modules that they need. And then from the modules that we need, we can run these integration tests. Now, the thing about an integration test is, we mentioned this up here. In Rust, you can test private functions. So there's this function here called internal adder, which is private in Rust. And we're seeing here how we can test this internal function. We say use super : asterisk. That brings all of these into visibility. And then we can say assert equals, and we can test these private functions. I don't ever do this, never. But if you like to do this, you can test private functions in Rust. You cannot test private functions in an integration test, right? And the reasons are obvious, because you don't have access to those scopes. Submodules and integration tests. Okay, yeah. So your test, just like your source directory, you can think of tests like a source directory. Your test directory can have other directories inside of it. So here they're creating, they're following the common library practice of creating a library for your tests. And they have a directory called common, and they have something called mod.rs. They should just create a directory called common and a file called common.rs instead of the old way, but this is how they've done it. So they're just showing you that you can create testing subdirectories and submodules. And lastly, if we create a binary crate, there is this is nothing special. In a binary crate, rather than having source lib, we have source main, and source main can call source lib. So we can test the library and we can test the main binary stuff. And that's it. So there's two different methods of testing binary crates that have included libraries. And we can test them both separately. We can test the binary by executing it, setting up the parameters and whatever, and then we can actually test the library too. The only area that I think that this is popular is something like ripgrep. We talked about ripgrep before. Is anyone using ripgrep? So ripgrep is a very popular library that is a re-implementation of grep on Rust. And it's like thousands of times faster, right? So if you are ever searching directories or files for text, especially programming, ripgrep is a great tool to do that. It's like a must-have in my opinion. There's a library for ripgrep too, so you can include that functionality in your own stuff. So they have testing suites for their library, and they have testing suites for their actual binary application. All right, so this is pretty easy because we're just covering tests. There's only 3 sections. Is there any questions?
You should do a presentation on ripgrep. It's great. That's a great tool.
I can show ripgrep because I don't want to see ripgrep that doesn't use it.
Yeah, let me take a peek.
Does anybody use Git in here?
I'm using.
You gotta see ripgrep. If you use Git, you gotta see ripgrep. Ripgrep.
So I downloaded ripgrep, and then I don't think I ever learned to use it. I think it's
Ripgrep
not
is quickly
easier.
becoming like a power user tool, you know, that you have to have.
I'm the self-proclaimed power user.
So before ripgrep, we had grep, which is a tool that persisted for 30 years. Tremendously powerful tool, and it works very effectively. There's nothing wrong with regular grep. The problem is it's just hideously slow for today's standard. If you were on a machine 30 years ago and you were searching through 1,000 files, that would be a big task. But now if you're using Git, you probably have 10,000 files in just your .git directory. So it's no longer, uncommon. And the question is, now we have multi-core machines, and we have SSDs, how can we rewrite these tools to have a more tuned workload for your average machine? Ripgrep is a total rewrite of it, and it makes use of things like multi-core and AVX and chipsets and all this kind of goofy stuff. But I'll show you kind of like what it does here. So here's public cPanel code. This is one of our Angular projects. And what I'll show you here is we have the ability to run something like, let's say I want to find the word document, right? If I do something like grep, I can do grep r document dot. And this will search for everything that has the word document in it. Now this is not a very good display, but it gets the job done. And if I type it to less, I can easily see all of the names and everything that has the word document, right? CSS, HTML, all of it there. If I want to see just the files, I can use the -L flag, and I can see all of the files that have the word document in it. So grep is very good at this kind of stuff. It can find files that have a match in it. It can find the lines that match it inside of all of the files. And in fact, if I wanted to find the file names that match something, I could use find dot, right? And this will return all of the different file names in this repository, right? And I can do something like this, WCL. There's 280 files in this repository.
Can't see the bottom of the screen.
There we go. There's 280 files in this repository. Like WCL counts the amount of lines. Find is going to print one line for every file. So if I wanted to search for all the file names that match something, I can do that too using grep. I could do something like this. Find dot, that's going to find all of the files and directories. And I can do something like pipe to grep, and then dot less. This is a great method of finding all of the less files, right? Or pipe to grep HTML. This will find all of the HTML files inside of a directory, right? So you can see here how this find and grep work hand in hand. Okay, well, rip grep is a much quicker way of doing this. So if we do something like minrg, you'll see the different invocations for rip grep, right? And if I wanted to find something like document, I would do rg document dot. This is going to search for all of the files that have the word document in it.
You don't have to use doc.
That's what I thought. So why is it not working?
Are you in the right directory?
I think it needs this. No? I am in the right directory.
Yeah, RG document without the doc just works for me.
In the world? What if you use git grep?
Does RG not search inside of the line?
Instead of what? What did it say about getting ignored?
Oh, is that what's going on here?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, rip grep will respect your bit ignore and automatically skip hidden files. Okay, that's what's going on. So
Which is actually really useful. When you're searching through code, you don't want to see the stuff that the code is ignoring.
that's what's going
Just see
on.
the code that actually gets run and looked at.
Yeah. So the deal here is that when I do grep r document L and I see it, all of these matches are in dist, right? And the problem here is that dist is in the .getignore file, right there. So if I delete that, now I can do it. RG document.
Well, isn't there a flag of RG that says don't ignore get ignore files?
I'm sure there is. I just don't know it.
Dash dash no
No
dash
ignore.
ignore.
Yeah.
And then there's also a dash dash hidden.
But I've never needed those. I don't want to see those. I've never wanted to see
Yeah,
those.
I wouldn't want to see them either, so I agree. But that'll actually work, so there you go. It's the same. But if you look at this, like if I do time on RG, right? It finishes in 0.1 seconds. If I do the same thing with like grep,
Which has now been cached. First time you run grep is not going to be that fast.
is that what it does? Is it caches it?
Yeah. And it might be your operating system catching the search. I was going to say you should use ULC to search a bigger repository. So you can see some differences in times.
Yeah, but I don't want to show that because I got proprietary code in the build.
Yeah.
Let's see if I have Postgres here. There we go. That's 10,000 files. There we go. So if I do here like RG Postgres, you're going to see tons of files. There we go. That match that guy. So if I do this, RG Postgres time, it took 0.7 seconds. If I do the same thing with grep, grep took 0.19 seconds. So it's 3 times slower. But yeah, if you have more than 10,000 files, it's even worse.
Yeah, it makes it. I guess it's so awesome for us. We deal with a huge repository. these things take so much time.
So one thing I found recently that's been kind of useful is you make like a code request to this website called cheat.sh. It gives you like a little cheat sheet. It's like kind of like a easier to read man page, but you can just do like curl cheat.sh / like RG for example, and it'll give you like examples for like riprap.
Ooh, does it get into globbing? That's the worst part about riprap is trying to figure out how to use globbing.
Yeah, right here. RG, regular expression, blob. Search for regular expression in files matching with blob. I don't know why you find that complex, but. Yeah, I mean, like the thing that's kind of weird too is like I still know the function, the way to do that with like find, you know. So when you've used find for a long time, all of this stuff does seem a lot easier. Because with find you would do something like this. It could be like find dot dash dash type F because you only want to find files, and then you would say dash dash name. And then I would do something like this, dot rs, right? And then this is going to find all files that end in .rs.
What are the different types of file suffixes that you have in that repo?
You want me to find all?
So like I'm going to try to give you the problem that I think I ran into. Find, like 2 or 3 of these of the types of suffixes and not the others. In my Perl thing, it's find all the PL and PN files. Don't show me any test files. Don't show me any JavaScript files. I just want PL and PN files.
So you could do this. Find dot.
But
let's go
do an example because it sounds easy and you can say something, but then when you actually try to do it.
So here's what you got, right? Let's jump into test 2. I'm going to go mkdir foobar. Right, we're going to go into foobar. We're going to touch test.pl.
No,
test2.pl.
you have to use a real world example.
Why? I don't understand why.
I don't understand why either. That's why I have the question.
mkdir t, cd into t, touch foo dot t, right? Is this what you want it to look like?
I guess we can try to do it this way, but I don't know if we're going to be able to recreate the problem.
Find dot name star dot pl or star dot pm type f.
I guess you should also make a T directory and put PL and PN files in the T directory.
I should also do what?
Make dir T and then CD into that and touch test.pl and test2.pm.
Okay, now you don't want it to go into the T directory.
Right.
That's the deal? Okay. So I think you would do this. Path, not like.
I'm guessing it's just going to be T slash.
Yeah, it's definitely path. Find file names, path, okay. Yeah, okay, so here. Path, not,
How about not path?
yeah.
Still got test 2.
Why didn't it get test that PL, is that like
Because you have to put it before the PL and the PM. So after the OR, it's not doing the not path anymore.
I think it's a good point.
You have to do what now?
You have to put not path in, after the OR. Yes.
Do you have to put it in both places before and after the OR?
Yeah, and now it's speaking of PL, and
Yeah.
not PM.
Yeah, so you gotta put it in both places. Unless you can use parentheses or something, maybe? I don't know.
How do you group conditionals and define? This is horrible.
It's easy, Evan. It's easy.
There you go. Question, no, it's like this. Force
Yeah.
precedence.
Alright. So you can use parentheses.
So then it would look something like this. And
Why do you have to escape them?
boom.
Yes, sir.
There you
How come
go.
man page didn't talk about escaping?
It did.
Oh, somehow missed that.
There
It
you
looked like,
go.
it looked like,
So that's how you do it with find.
supposedly. You have to go into ULC to really understand, to really see the work.
One command, I don't know if I have it installed, it's called finger. You can finger a user. Yeah, isn't that, I read that in a Unix book. I'm being serious, alright? I have a book on Unix. And you use it to find users. I'm sure
This is a multi-line format displaying all of the information described with a dash S.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's finger.
That was a huge joke for like 30 years in universities. But can you, okay, so now can you use the same find options in RG?
Can you do what?
Can you use the same find options on RG?
No, that's very differently. But it would be something like this.
Kid named Finger.
RG blob, and then it would be something like star.pl.
Sometimes I put mine in my jacket. That's my keys, not my wallet. But, same.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're gonna head out. I gotta do a couple of things.
All good things with people.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
night. Hope everybody has a nice Thanksgiving if y'all celebrate it.
Yeah, see you after Thanksgiving.
You too, man.
See you in 2 weeks, I guess.
Definitely.
Then when we're back 2 weeks, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
December?
No, 30th, I think. What are they publishing?
We're not meeting next week.
Oh, we're not meeting. We're gonna lock the building. I had to pay them to do that so everyone wouldn't give a class today before Thanksgiving. See y'all guys.
Take care, my friend.
Thanks, see you later.
I think this is what you want, but I'm getting it there.
It's easy. Oh yeah.
No such file or directory. No such.
I thought so too. That's weird. What Linux is that? Maybe it's not needed anymore. Like, I don't know. I'll install it.
We're done with the Rust thing?
Yeah, for this class.
Okay.
Wait. What are you doing, Evan?
segue. Thought you were just sidetracked for a while.
No, we're not.
You're only using one dash for glob. One dash is for, you can do dash G or you can do dash dash glob. You can't do one dash and glob.
Is that what he's speaking about? That's a find as a not a one dash thing. There you go. And then glob, not star. There you go. That's what it is. So all I'd have to do now is echo foo,
What?
and then I have to find something, right? There you go. So that's how you do the glob.
Wait, you put foo into all the other test files too. There you go. Easy.
Let's put the glob
It's
to
easy.
that. Why is that all clear?
So Evan, how do you keep you're not commercially, like, for work, using Rust. It's more of a sort of a hobby right now.
I use it for work.
Do you?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you how you keep current on it if you don't use it all the time.
I do all my contract work with Rust.
Okay.
So all my side work is Rust.
You used U at all?
YEW.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking of checking that out.
What's that?
It's it is the WebAssembly toolkit for Rust that they give you widgets, and you can essentially write like a website in Rust, and then it'll generate WebAssembly code. I have work here that I did in that code.
It was described to me as React for Rust.
So what's the claim to fame performance?
I think it's faster than React, but slower than other JavaScript implementations. But that's just
You actually,
that's a product of WebAssembly just not being quite ready yet.
So why are you using that? You're a Rust fan? You're a Rustafarian?
Rustation?
Rustation? It is something like that.
just say Rustafarian.
Rustite?
Yeah, it's awesome. Where's the code there?
I have the word Rust. That's Joseph. It's like, you know what?
You see the old step on goodie.
Sometimes I know it
What
What if they change the name?
I've done it before. Not for like, because it's curious.
No, just to see if I want to or not.
The Me Too movement?
Oh, sure.
See if I pass anybody.
I want to see this goes.
Yeah.
And just install cargo watch.
So like,
Yeah.
it wouldn't shut down. They changed the name of the distribution, said, hey, let's vote to.
Yeah.
Nobody uses this tool anyway.
Look,
I mean, you could say like finger,
They're better than jeans, regular jeans.
space,
And then
touch,
Yeah.
file.
Oh, man.
bottom.
I mean, they're specific to the task at hand. Like it's got the, but
I'm trying to compile
look,
it.
this
Where
might,
you actually live
some
stream?
real crash, this might not stay where it.
I said, where are you
This
actually
is already
live
showing
streaming?
it. Yeah, but it may not.
Oh, you want Adrian?
If you push it to one side,
YouTube or what?
YouTube.
it's supposed to absorb impact and
What's
whatever.
the channel? I tried searching for it online.
Like even right here.
Okay, you have phone number?
Yeah, so
Okay.
your pad is off to the side. I'm just saying, it's
Give me a phone number.
perfect.
Yeah, I was
Stupid, I
But
can't
it's-
get it shot.
It's called cargo watch.
Mhm.
So anytime I save, I have two instances. This one's just gonna run the program every time I save. So like if I go over here,
That was last week. I don't know where I was.
so right now it says hello right there. I'm gonna save
Oh,
this.
check that out. I'm on TV and I didn't expect to check that.
Famous, man.
150 people watch
How are people watching eat pizza? Great. Well, what's the,
You give me a phone number?
oh, my phone number? Sure, it's 832 398 4133.
Out for testing.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I save any file in here, it will
Oh, my
just
name's
return.
So I guess you gave up it.
I also, this one's converting.
What's up?
I guess you gave up the RGU.
It's designed so that you.
Glob is hard to use.
We were trying to do you.
So here you can see, I have this kind of being ignored here.
Mr. Zoo.
So And I have, it's like not in it.
You just have to pick up the knot.
So if I just do this line.
That's Jared, it's called Jared.
Hey, you're also probably.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's not that, like, just like configuring the thing, it's gonna take.
I think that there's a,
Like,
yeah, pre-glob, there you go.
That it would take that long?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot more overhead than like something like Android where you're having to set up an emulator and all that. Like that seems like it might take.
I think you don't even have to use the apps.
Still, 3 minutes sounds a long time.
You know what it was, I bet it was downloaded.
But you put a carrot in front of the team.
What?
But you put a carrot in front of the team.
Maybe some shit was already like set up and it passed.
Oh, you want me to say, oh, I just typed it in, yeah, we can actually.
Yeah, maybe.
Cause it did, one was like 3 minutes and one was like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I expect there's some significant caching.
The carrot in front of the team.
There you go.
What's up, pre-glob?
Okay, thanks.
It's a,
I don't think it's
right, it's conditioned right before the gloss.
pre-glob is a flag that works in conjunction with the pre-flag, namely when one or more pre-glob flags are given.
Say your name's pronounced.
Only files that match a given set of globs
Who
should
chew?
be entered to the command specified by the pre-flag.
I'll try to remember.
My first name is he. Who's he is me.
Oh.
So I will call him Mr. Chu. Company call him Mr. Chu.
Mr. Shoot. Okay.
I actually am thinking of writing
Let me see again.
something that someone wants me to do.
It's like, I know part of the answer to this.
It's will work out good.
Do they know what Rust is, or you like?
I don't know, I get to decide all this stuff.
They just
Want
a certain
they want an
functionality.
application that does thing, I get to decide how it gets there.
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
Like I did an Electron app for a guy.
Preceded globs of local globs match a file.
Electron still works.
A glob given later in the command count.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was
So,
yeah,
we're doing
he's
this wrong.
updated, but then he's like
This
got
needs to
busy
go to the
and
back,
didn't, I don't know, the meeting.
and then what needs to happen is
I don't
it's
know,
got
I'm still using it, but apparently.
not, and then like
And
this.
they run it on Mac and Windows, works on both fine.